Alright, so I'm not going to waste any time here. You read the title, so you know I don't think this film is all that good. Do you like the film? Good for you. I'm glad you do. But I'm not talking about enjoyment, I'm talking strictly about rating quality. I'm not going to make a breakdown of the general plot of the film, going from scene to scene like I did with On Stranger Tides. So I'll just be breaking down this film in sections. I'd argue the biggest issues of the film boil down to a few key things. Broken characterization, retcons, and extreme contrivances. Each of these are interlinked to create one of the most disjointed films I think I've ever seen in my entire life. It's really on the level of the Star Wars sequel trilogy if I'm being completely honest. Starting off with the easiest flaw to discuss, broken characterization. I remember when I first saw this film, one thing stuck out to me the most. Jack just isn't Jack. Remember the cutting wit? Remember his crazy plans that somehow worked out in the end? Remember how he would manipulate his opponents to let their guard down or position them in a way where he could get a jump on them? Nope. Gone. Now he's a drunken pirate like the memes portrayed. Calling it flanderization doesn't even begin to cover it, because he's straight up just not the same character. Yes, Jack was a bit of a drunk in the previous films, but he was never at the point of being a hopeless loser. The most that would happen to him would be him falling asleep on an island which Elizabeth then took advantage of to signal the Royal Navy, or him being a little tipsy when he went down to the rum locker in the opening of Dead Man's Chest. But here, he's just straight up an idiot who's barely capable of forming coherent sentences. How lovely. Now we also have another character ruin too. Surprisingly enough, Mr. Gibbs. Yeah, I really can't believe I can sit here and talk about how Mr. Gibbs of all characters was assassinated. This is Halloween 5 all over again. But yeah, Gibbs straight up leaves Jack because he didn't have any means of payment for his crew, which is kinda odd. I always thought that in Curse of the Black Pearl, when he comes back to save Jack at Port Royal, it meant that he learned not to leave his friends behind. And especially after all the adventures they had since, I'd assume Jack and Gibbs were tighter than ever. Hell, at the end of the last film, which this film is only set 1 year after, Gibbs and Jack seem to be on really good terms in spite of Jack being an asshole to him in that film. Later in the film, when Henry stupidly points out that Salazar was after them, Gibbs then stages a mutiny against his good friend. He also frames Scrum as the captain after spotting a British ship, so that he could take the fall and potentially be murdered by the British. And later, he also rips off one of Scrum's toenails to pick a lock, which, gross. Alright, so who's next to pick apart? Well, it's kinda hard to do that with Henry and Karina, since they barely have any characterization or reasoning for falling in love, besides the general Hollywood expectation that the male lead and the female lead must become a couple. Oh, speaking of Karina, actually, Barbossa! Yeah, she just doesn't know Barbossa at all, a pirate she literally knew for the grand total of an afternoon, and after he sacrifices his life for her because, of course, he's her father, because, that makes total sense, she then decides to take his name as her own. Yeah, that's pretty dumb. Now, I'll give this film some small amount of credit. It at least didn't ruin the shit out of Barbossa, at least not in terms of characterization. It did, however, needlessly waste him by killing him off in a pretty moronic scene where Salazar is trying to climb up the anchor of the Pearl to kill Karina and the others, because why? Why would Salazar be so focused on killing them once he becomes immortal again? Shouldn't his priority be keeping his life in this extremely dangerous situation? So yeah, they created an unearned death for probably the second or third most beloved character in this entire franchise. That's just wonderful. Oh, and on top of all these major character assassinations, they also forgot to include Elizabeth Swann. The Pirate King. I think she, of all people, would have a vested interest in seeing that her husband is free of his, air quotes, curse. And yes, I used air quotes because the Dutchman curse is something that this film doesn't understand at all. This leads us into the next section, retcons. So in the previous films, the Dutchman curse is a curse afflicted upon people who join Davy Jones's crew, which causes them to lose their humanity and become part of the ship. Pretty simple stuff, easy to understand. Jones was never supposed to be cursed by the ship. It was his own actions that caused the curse, which caused him to become a monster. He wasn't faithful to the goddess of the seas, so he turned into a sea monster. So now, explain to me why Will's cursed in this film. Like, I'm genuinely confused how this works now because this film throws a wrench into everything. Which is it, Disney? Was Will not faithful to his sacred task even though he was well aware of the duty and what betraying it would do? Because if so, that's character assassination for Will. If not, then we're led to the implication that the Dutchman itself curses her captains. If this is the case, then the story of Davy Jones isn't a cautionary tale about trying to control forces beyond human comprehension like the seas, but rather a tale of a sadistic deity taking advantage of a mortal man's love and sentencing him to an eternity of suffering for no reason. That's a really bad look on one of the coolest characters in this franchise, a character who's not even seen or mentioned here. Now, I'm going to dip back a little bit into discussing characterization here, because this next point ties in both characterization and retcons, and that's Captain Salazar. So you guys are going to have to bear with me here as I discuss this section because it could get a little bit complicated. So around halfway through the film, Barbossa and Salazar have an argument about what it's like to be bested by Jack, and Salazar decides to tell Barbossa his backstory. In my old video on why the villains of the first 3 films worked so well, I explained why Salazar doesn't work well at all, and my reasoning was his lack of proper motivation. Many people commented how he wanted to exterminate all pirates because they killed his father and grandfather, which, yeah, makes sense that he wants to kill pirates, but that's just the start of his characterization. You don't just stop there and say, you know what, this is an acceptable character. You need to make absolutely sure that the character you've written serves a function beyond being a basic archetype. He's a revenge-driven villain. Okay, but that doesn't really mean much when most of the villains in the series are driven by some form of wanting revenge. Hell, even some of our heroes are driven by revenge. We've seen a villain driven by greed who lost himself along the way but eventually turned himself around and understood that a life of freedom and adventure is far more worth it, a lesson he could potentially have learned from his once enemy Jack Sparrow. Davy Jones is a villain driven by his own sadistic goal for revenge against Calypso for supposedly betraying him, slaughtering the very people she wanted him to ferry to the afterlife. Beckett wanted unlimited power and wealth, and that manifested in wanting the extermination of pirates. But now we have a guy who just really doesn't like Jack Sparrow, and that's all the characterization he has. What's even sadder is how we didn't get any interactions between him and Jack where they aren't trying to kill each other. Part of what makes the other villains work so well is how they all have screen time with Jack where they aren't at arms and ready to kill each other. Now I need to discuss the elephant in the room. This backstory for Salazar fundamentally breaks the entire Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. Like, it's remarkable how unbelievably the continuity got because of this one individual scene. So, this scene acts as a backstory for Jack, basically showing off all the iconography that people are familiar with so they can put it in the trailers and get people excited. Hey, remember the Black Pearl? Hey, remember Jack's hat? Hey, remember the compass? Oh, hold on a second. His compass. Yeah, the compass he got from Tiadama. Like, that's not even expanded universe material, that's just straight up said in the films.
The compass you barter from me, it cannot lead you to this?
This just can't be excused. There's no real workaround for it. It's just a flat-out retcon, and one that basically makes it so this film can't be canon to the previous ones. Think about it. This film establishes that giving the compass away would free Salazar from the Devil's Triangle, which he's done countless times thus far in the series. Also, at the same time, the compass's backstory is responsible for this entire film happening. Because if we wanted to just ignore the scene and just say, Jack got the compass from Tiadama, then the base mechanics which caused this film to happen cannot exist. Then, if we ignore the line from Tiadama and say this film's explanation is canon, then it means that Salazar would have been freed from the Devil's Triangle multiple times over. This isn't just something that undermines previous films or ruins an individual character. This is something that straight up makes the internal logic of this universe not possible with itself. It isn't a plot hole. This is outright plot self-destruction. This is somehow Palpatine return levels of narrative destruction. Some of you might think it's not that big of a deal, and that I might be exaggerating a little bit here because it's just one small scene. But this one small scene covers so much ground in terms of world building, so it needed to take extra care to make sense, which sadly it didn't. Now, I'm going to do a quick lightning round of smaller issues and contrivances that add up to make this film a complete mess. They never established that Salazar and his crew couldn't set foot on land, which makes Jack, Karina, and Henry's escape in the second act a massive contrivance. In Dead Man's Chest, we learned that Jones couldn't set foot on land, and we didn't get any word on if his crew could or could not, so it's fine when they're able to walk on land later. There are ways to make Jack and the gang escape from Salazar without resorting to this last-minute, oh yeah, he's cursed to never set foot on land bullshit excuse. At the start of the film, for some reason, the Navy ship decided to follow a pirate ship into a cave. I think it goes without saying that that's a pretty moronic plan. How does this random guy know that Jack is buried on St. Martin? Also, if it became well known enough that this random guy knows about this, why would Jack have stayed there? Why not sail away and go anywhere else? Funny that this also happens to be the same island that Karina was on as well, which is even funnier when considered that his parents knew Barbossa, and it just so happens that Barbossa's daughter was on the same island that Jack was on. Also remarkable how Henry apparently swam against the tide from the Devil's Triangle all the way to St. Martin. Hey, fun fact, humans cannot do that. Also weird that when Henry and Jack meet, Jack is disgusted by the mention of Will and Elizabeth, even though they all parted ways on good terms. Hell, Jack gave up the opportunity to live forever just to give Will another chance at life. They're all friends. So why is it that when he's reminded of them, he's disgusted? Later on, when they're being chased by the Silent Mary, Salazar sends out zombie sharks to kill Will and Henry. Now, it might seem like a bit of an odd complaint, but why would Salazar have these? Think about it. They're obviously trying to create a similar feeling to the first Kraken attack in Dead Man's Chest, with a supernatural monster being sent to kill the protagonist. But in the case of Jones, he's basically a sea god. It makes sense that he has some kind of supernatural monster at his arsenal. He rules the seas. Why does Salazar have some zombie sharks? Later on, the Silent Mary somehow catches up to the Black Pearl, you know, the fastest ship in the seas. It's even faster than the Dutchman, which is a supernatural ship. So how is it that the Silent Mary, a ship that doesn't even have functioning sails, was able to catch up to the Pearl? Why does the figurehead of the Silent Mary come to life? Oh, look at that. The Pearl got beached on a rocky shore. Yeah, that's never sailing again. Oh wait, why is it sailing now? And how the hell is it sailing on the edge of a f***ing waterfall? Okay, so Henry got captured by Salazar, who possessed his body, but when was that ever established? Once again, you need to make it clear early on that this stuff is possible, because now I might as well just assume that Salazar can also fly, shoot lasers from his eyes, and teleport, given that his abilities weren't clearly defined early on. What is she doing here? Did they not want to show her flipping off the ghosts? How is Jack alive? That small book is not protecting him. I think it's quite funny how one of the most powerful artifacts in the known world that also determines the state of magic in this universe is able to be broken by a basic cutlass. Why is Salazar so concerned with killing Jack still? Dude, you're mortal again. You're in a really dangerous situation. I obviously can't play the audio here, but they used Beckett's death theme for when Barbossa died. That's just great. When this now heroic character sacrifices his life, he goes out with a theme song of the main threat of the original trilogy. Thanks. I love that arguably one of the most fleshed out characters from the first 3 films was turned into a reward for Will at the end, rather than being an actual character herself. F*** off. Oh, so I guess Jones is back from the dead now because all curses are broken, even though the self-afflicted curse is clearly still upon him because he's got a goddamn crab claw and his tentacle beard. Cool. Good to know this film undid everything that came before it. I genuinely think the people who worked on this were going out of their way to undo the narrative progress of the previous films. Barbossa is dead again. We have our replacement Will and Elizabeth with a fraction of the characterization. The British are back in full swing as On Stranger Tide established. Davy Jones is somehow back from the dead, and Jack is once again captain of the Black Pearl. Cool. Good to know that there were never any lasting consequences for any of the previous films, and we're back to the status quo after Curse of the Black Pearl. Thank you, Disney. Anyways, I think I'm done here. Join my Discord, check out my merch and Patreon, subscribe and comment and all that jazz. Call me if we ever get a 6th film that retcons this one out of canon, please.